Dad initially refused to walk me down the aisle, opting for a Hawaii trip with his favorite daughter instead. However, he changed his mind just a day before the wedding because of my actions. I'm 26 and getting married this week, with just 5 days to go, and the drama involving my sister and dad is already overwhelming. For context, my dad has been a single father for the past 10 years since my mother passed away from a long illness when I was 16. It was incredibly tough for us, especially for me, as I felt like I had no support and my sister would lord over me. My mother had treated us equally, but my dad had a soft spot for my sister. After her passing, my sister Katie got away with a lot while I had to deal with more. Katie, who is 2 years older than me, has always been incredibly entitled. As a child, she would treat me like her personal servant, and when I protested, my dad would insist I comply, believing she was too fragile to manage things herself. Even though she grew out of her earlier illnesses, she continued to pretend to be chronically ill to avoid chores, leaving me to handle everything around the house. This behavior was frustrating, but if I didn't do it, no one else would. Nobody else would help out because my dad was always too exhausted from work, and I didn't want to bother him. After I turned 18 and moved out for college, things started improving for me. I didn't have to live with Katie anymore, and we lost touch after college. We never really got along. She would constantly take jabs at me, try to provoke me, and was generally unpleasant to be around. I was relieved to be out of the house. I missed my dad, but I wasn't willing to sacrifice my sanity to live with my family. Many might find it odd that I had a good relationship with my dad, despite his obvious favoritism towards Katie, but we did. Our relationship was solid until recently. I wasn't a doormat for him. I stood up for myself and often clashed with him over his bias. But in the end, he was still my father, and we always made up. I met my fiancé Andy in college, and after dating for nearly 8 years, we decided it was time to get married. We're both in good places with our careers, so it felt like the right moment. Meanwhile, Katie has been struggling recently and moved back in with my dad after graduating. She had lived on her own for a couple of years, but last year things took a turn. Katie decided to quit her job to join a friend in a jewelry business. Unfortunately, the venture was poorly planned. They did no research and were unprepared, which doomed the project from the start. They burned through all their investment money, mostly raised from family and friends, and failed to generate any substantial returns. After the business failed, Katie had to shut it down and has been unemployed for nearly 6 months without making any effort to find a new job. She's now entirely dependent on my dad. My dad had planned to retire in a couple of years, but supporting Katie has made that less feasible. This situation has been a recent point of contention between us. I believe he needs to push her to find a job instead of relying on him indefinitely. I think she needs to take responsibility for her life rather than moping around because of one failed business. However, my dad feels she needs time to emotionally recover before she can commit to anything new. We have very different views on this, so we try to avoid discussing it to prevent arguments. Additionally, I got engaged just a couple of weeks after Katie's business failed, which my dad thinks has made her more upset, as she struggles with feelings of inadequacy while seeing me succeed. I know she is jealous of me, as she makes a point of broadcasting her dissatisfaction on social media while pretending everything is fine. Katie often posts about how terrible her life is, seemingly seeking attention. When people respond to her posts that clearly cry out for help, she brings up my successes and claims she deserves everything I have, suggesting that I only succeeded by manipulating and stepping on others. This isn't true. I'm where I am due to hard work, while she tends to play the victim despite being responsible for many of her own misfortunes. The only exception was about 3 weeks ago when her cat, which she had for almost 15 years, passed away. She was understandably devastated and refused to eat for days, leaving my dad to beg her to get out of bed and try to move on. I felt bad for both of them, but with my wedding just a few weeks away, I had to focus on my preparations. I decided not to get overly involved, but kept in touch with my dad, offering comfort whenever he was upset about Katie's behavior. I didn't think this situation would cause any further issues, but a few days ago, my dad contacted me to let me know that he wouldn't be able to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. I had assumed he would do so and had called him the day before to formally invite him. He seemed hesitant and said he needed time to think, which struck me as odd. The next day, he called to decline, and his reason was astonishing. He explained that following her cat's recent death, Katie wanted to go to Hawaii to scatter its ashes on the beach. She had taken her cat with her on a memorable road trip to Hawaii a few years ago, and the location held special significance for her. Since the day of my wedding was exactly 1 month after her cat's passing, she wanted to do this on my wedding day. Not only was my dad declining to walk me down the aisle, but he also said he wouldn't be able to attend the wedding at all. He expressed his apologies and promised to make it up to me later, but he needed to go with Katie because she had finally expressed a desire to do something and needed emotional support. I was extremely upset, but tried to remain calm. I suggested that perhaps a friend could accompany Katie or that she could do it a day after my wedding. I wanted at least one parent present at my wedding, but my dad insisted that Katie was firm in her decision. Despite him suggesting alternatives to allow him to attend, Katie became very upset when he proposed other options, accusing him of not caring about her feelings. She argued that while I would have many people supporting me on my wedding day, she had only him and that she should be the priority since she was going through a tough time. My dad agreed, saying that given her situation, she should come first. Hearing that, I completely lost it. I told him that Katie had always been his priority and that I wasn't surprised he was abandoning me on my wedding day for her. I ended the call abruptly and blocked him everywhere. I was devastated, and when I shared this with Andy, he understood my frustration. I cried for 2 days, but then I decided to retaliate in a way I knew would upset my dad and Katie. Instead of continuing to be upset, I asked my uncle, my dad's twin brother, with whom he has a strained relationship, to walk me down the aisle. I've witnessed their animosity since I was a child, and I knew this would definitely get under their skin. My dad and uncle used to constantly try to one-up each other at family events, creating a lot of awkwardness for everyone around them. My grandparents tried hard to mediate, but their hatred for each other made it nearly impossible to control. After my mom passed away, my dad began avoiding any events where my uncle would be present. Although I didn't have a strong relationship with my uncle, I could sympathize with him since I understood what it's like to have a contentious sibling. After my conversation with my dad, I was so angry that I decided to reach out to my uncle and ask him to walk me down the aisle. He was surprised and unsure, saying he didn't think we were close enough for that. I explained that this was my way of retaliating against my dad for his actions. Once he heard that this would upset my dad, my uncle was immediately on board and even laughed about it. Despite being in their 50s, he was eager to take the chance to embarrass his brother. We agreed to make a public post about it, knowing it would definitely get back to my dad. That evening, I shared a post expressing my gratitude to my uncle for agreeing to walk me down the aisle. Within hours, I received a phone call from my father. I had unblocked him for this purpose, and as soon as he reached out, my dad was furious when he found out I had asked my uncle to walk me down the aisle. He said he would try to convince Katie to delay scattering her cat's ashes, but insisted that I needed to agree to let him walk me down the aisle instead of my uncle, arguing it would be embarrassing and insulting to have my uncle take that role when he was still alive. I told him he had his chance and blew it over Katie, and now he was getting a taste of his own medicine. He got really upset, calling me petty and immature, and I admitted that I was being petty, which only seemed to infuriate him more. By the end of the call, he was in tears, saying he never expected me to act this way just because he was trying to support Katie, who was struggling. He accused me of lacking empathy and being cruel because Katie had lost so much, and I couldn't even allow her to have my dad for one day. Now I feel that what I did might have been insensitive, especially given Katie's situation. I'm wondering if I should apologize to my dad. With only 2 days left until the wedding, I've decided to walk down the aisle by myself. After reflecting on everything, I think it's more fitting for me to handle it alone rather than deal with all this drama. My uncle has agreed to attend the wedding as a guest, as we had already achieved the reaction we wanted from my dad. Initially, my uncle was skeptical about walking me down the aisle, so he was fine with this arrangement. Instead of calling my father, which would likely lead to another confrontation, I left him a message. I told him he was welcome to attend the wedding, but didn't need to walk me down the aisle. I also said that if he preferred to go to Hawaii with Katie, that was fine, but it would mean I would have to cut him off from my life permanently. He's had ample chances to show that he could prioritize me, but he has failed each time, and I'm no longer willing to tolerate this disrespect. I want to enjoy my wedding without worrying about his reactions or how others might feel about my decisions. His behavior, especially his last minute change of plans, has made me feel like my feelings don't matter. If he truly cared, he would have apologized after receiving my message, but he hasn't even bothered to respond. Andy agrees that this is the right decision, given that the wedding is just a few days away. I got married yesterday, and it feels surreal to finally have both the engagement ring and the wedding band on my finger. I'm overjoyed, but I still owe you an update on what happened with my dad and sister. Unfortunately, my father did not attend the wedding. He chose instead to accompany my sister to Hawaii for the scattering of her cat's ashes. I don't want to delve too deeply into this choice, but it's clear where his priorities lie. I've received some criticism for appearing not to take my sister's depression seriously. Let me clarify. I do empathize with her, and I understand that depression is a severe condition. However, it's not her depression that led her to choose this particular timing. It's her ongoing need to compete with me and seek attention that drove her to scatter her cat's ashes on my wedding day. She could have waited a few days or done it earlier, but she chose the day of my wedding, which feels deliberate. I believe her actions are more about undermining me than about her mental health struggles. I'm not making light of my sister's struggles, but I refuse to excuse her actions just because she's having a hard time. As for my dad, I'm at a loss for words. He has let me down yet again, and this time I'm not going to forgive him. It will be tough going through life without any parental support, but the truth is he has never really been in my corner. His focus has always been on Katie, and I see that clearly now. I was naive to think things could change. He chose not to attend my wedding and waited until after the ceremony to inform me. Despite leaving him a message, he didn't respond, so I was left uncertain until I walked down the aisle. After the ceremony, he finally texted to say he was in Hawaii with Katie, attending the scattering of her cat's ashes. He claimed Katie needed him more than I did and apologized, hoping I would understand. While his message might have had some significance, he also mentioned that my petty and immature behavior with my uncle had further discouraged him. He felt it was best for us to stay apart for a while, which was another reason for his absence. I admit my actions were petty, but they stemmed from feeling ignored and undervalued after my mom's passing. I won't pretend my actions weren't immature, but I felt compelled to do something to get a reaction from my dad and see if he actually cared. It turns out he didn't care enough to show up for me. The message he sent on the day of my wedding really upset me, so I blocked him and focused on enjoying my day. Given he had already decided not to come, his message felt redundant. When people asked about my father's and sister's absence, I told them the truth. I figured the situation reflected poorly on them, not on me, so there was no reason to hide it. Reactions varied. Some were speechless, while others found the situation sadly amusing. Now, it seems the entire family knows that my dad chose to go to Hawaii with Katie instead of attending my wedding. It's a significant failure on his part as a father, but I still had a fantastic time. My wedding was the best day of my life, and I'm excited to spend my life with the man I love. I've decided that Andy will be my only family from now on. Update. It's been a week since the wedding, and it still feels amazing to say that. Andy and I are about to go on our honeymoon, but of course, my dad and Katie couldn't let me enjoy my happiness without confrontation. 3 days ago, Katie texted me. I hadn't blocked her, just my father. But after reading her message, I almost blocked her too because it was frustrating to see her claim the moral high ground. The only reason I haven't blocked her yet is that I want to be informed if something happens to my father. Despite our differences, I know she would let me know in case of an emergency. I understand that many might suggest going no contact, but I don't think I can do that. Even though my dad has been a terrible father, I don't want to become a terrible daughter. This might not make sense to everyone, but it aligns with my morals, and I intend to stick with them, so I'd appreciate it if people refrained from commenting on this choice. Katie's message said, "Hey, we just got back from Hawaii. We've been contacted by many relatives who think we were wrong to scatter my cat's ashes on the day of your wedding. I'm not surprised you chose to share this and portray us negatively, but I'm disappointed that you continue to pick on me, especially given how hard things are right now. I really wish you hadn't spoken badly about me and Dad. You should understand how tough it is to lose a loved one and show more compassion." Katie's message really irritated me. She mentioned that Dad noticed I had blocked him and was upset, suggesting I should undo the block. She also implied that I need to be more considerate of them and can't just think of myself. The tone of her message was incredibly frustrating, pretentious, and self righteous. I almost blocked her, but instead I decided to craft a reply. "Hey, Katie, I did tell our relatives why you and Dad weren't at the wedding, and I chose to be honest because I'm not going to lie. By deciding not to attend, you put yourself in that position, and it's unfair to expect me to cover for you, especially given how unkind both of you have been. You couldn't even consider putting me first on my wedding day, so I don't feel I owe you an apology. If Dad is upset about being blocked, he should have thought things through before making his choice. I've decided I don't want any contact with either of you, so please respect that. I've decided to send the following message. Please do not contact me unless it's an emergency. If there's something urgent, you can text or call me, but otherwise, I would prefer not to hear from either of you. Both you and Dad have hurt me deeply over the years, and I agree with what Dad said. It's best if we spend some time apart for now. I am married now and want to focus on enjoying my life with my husband. He's my family now, and I wish you both the best. Goodbye." After showing the message to Andy, I sent it, and Katie replied a few minutes later. She said she would respect my wishes and mentioned that Dad is still very upset about my decision. However, I feel they brought this on themselves. If Dad is truly upset, it's his fault. I'm now going to focus on enjoying my honeymoon, which we've been planning for a long time. I deserve to have a great time.